All right, Chair, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Zeke. So this is the regular meeting of the Citizens Oversight Committee, acting as the Citizens Finance Advisory Committee. It's Tuesday, December 15th, 2020, 3:04 p.m. And we'll do a roll call to see who's here. Homer Alexander.
Here.
Bart Beckman.
Here.
Lois Johnson.
Here.
Barbara Spagnola.
Here.
Tina Winner.
Here.
And I'm here, John Martin. So all six of us are here, and we have the one vacancy still, which I guess will be filled in the next couple months. Okay, so we'll call this meeting to order. And are there any committee member announcements? Okay.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you, Barbara. That's a good one. Any others?
Hello, Kathy.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, Katie, why don't you take a moment just to kind of introduce yourself and say hi to everybody. And we did a little bit of that before the meeting, but maybe you could do it kind of formally. Thank you.
No problem. It's very nice to be here. I'm Katie Lichtig. I'm the Interim Finance Director, and I have the pleasure of serving the community of Morro Bay after having retired from municipal service in June. Some folks are saying that I don't take well to retirement, given that I only took 5 months sabbatical after having worked more than 35 years in public service. I served 9 years at the start of my career in Washington, D.C. In the last portion of that 9 years, for 6 of them, I worked for the Inspector General's office at the Treasury Department and also at the Education Department. And then I transitioned to municipal government. I got the opportunity to work in Santa Monica, Beverly Hills, Malibu, and San Luis Obispo. Before retiring. I worked in Santa Monica twice, so I retired from there in June. And when Scott reached out and said that he was in need of an interim finance director, I said, well, can't really do as much traveling as I had hoped to do, and I think I've got the skills to help, at least in a pinch. And so I'm happy to be here and looking forward to serving you as the staff liaison for CFAC, and then helping the city navigate these treacherous financial times. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Katie. Do you live here in Morro Bay?
I do, actually.
Nice.
Temporarily, at least.
Okay, nice. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so then we have the public comment period for any comments that relate to things not on the agenda, but are under our purview. And also, if you can't stay for that item, this would be an appropriate time to make comments about an item on our agenda. So, Zeke, is there anyone in the queue from the public?
There are a couple people in the queue. Nobody has their hand raised at the moment.
Okay. Well, there will be an opportunity for public comment as each item comes up. So, hopefully I'll remember that.
Okay.
Okay, so then we'll move on to our first item, the consent calendar, which is the approval of the minutes for the October 20th, 2020 meeting. And are there any changes, modifications, corrections to that? Anybody? Okay, I did have one, just the very last thing on adjournment. There's no time shown for the adjournment, and I had recorded that we adjourned at 4:03. So Charlie, maybe if you could just add that as a correction. I'll entertain a motion to approve with that one correction.
Also move. This is Lois.
Thank you, Lois. A second?
Also move, or to second, thank you.
Okay, Barbara, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that is approved.
For my benefit, could you just repeat what time the meeting adjourned?
4:03.
Great, thank you.
4:03 p.m. Unless you prefer military time.
No, this is perfect.
Okay. All right, so on the business items, the first item is review of the fiscal year 1920 unaudited transactions from the collection of the general purpose local sales tax, commonly known as Measure Q. And Katie had sent out her report, and I don't think we need to go through the whole thing again since we all received that in written form, and we did send in some questions. So what I'd like to do is just to start with those questions that were submitted and ask if there's any follow-up to any of those questions. Okay, well, I did have a follow-up on one of them at least, but maybe there could be others. Katie, on the interest expense for the loan for the fire station construction, there was an end of year adjustment for accrued interest payable. $15,500 and some dollars, I believe it was. And that had never been done before. And I'm not sure that is actually correct because Measure Q is a governmental fund. And I believe that in governmental funds, interest on long-term debt is not accrued at the end of the year. And it never had been in that fund. This is the first year we've seen that. So maybe there's been a new GASB announcement or a pronouncement that we haven't kept current on, but according to the old rules, I wouldn't think that would be done.
John, can I comment on that same issue?
Please. Yes.
Barbara will remember, but some years back, Susan Slayton provided us a amortization table for the term of the loan. So I tried to find it and I couldn't, but I don't understand why there was any variance between the principal payments and the interest payments, since they were spelled out precisely on that term sheet.
Right. Well, here's the thing. Well, in fact, if you want to see the amortization schedule in a more summarized form, there's one that's reprinted in the CAFR in the notes section. It shows 4 years worth of annual data, and then it shows the next, like, in 5-year increments. But what happened there, Homer, is that the interest payments are due semi-annually on March 1st and September 1st.
Correct.
So the September 1st interest expense covers the period of March 1st through August 31st. So 4 of those months are in the prior fiscal year. And if this were an enterprise fund, then those 4 months worth of interest expense would be shown as accrued interest payable.
Correct.
And so there has to be an adjustment to the interest expense to show that on the balance sheet. But in governmental funds, that's not done unless GASB has changed the rules since I learned them.
Okay. Because, Barbara, how long have you and I been looking at this? 10 years? Or since the fire station was...
At least that. And you're right, Homer. I have the amortization somewhere as well. We have discussed it before, yeah.
First time that's ever happened. You're right, John. And since the origination of the loan.
Right. So, Katie, what's your comment on that?
Yeah, informed the chair and the vice chair that Sandy isn't able to be with us today, our senior accounting and budget manager, who would be able to answer this question straight off the top of her head. And so I would appreciate the opportunity to review that with her when she comes back in. And it may be tomorrow or maybe sometime later in the week, but she and Valerie Webb, who is an accounting technician, gave me the answer to the question as it was presented to you. And so I appreciate the opportunity to circle back with Sandy and be able to answer that question in the most accurate way possible.
Okay, thank you.
John, before we leave the fire station loan, I have a question that probably Katie can't answer, but maybe the city manager can. The piece of property on the corner of Highway 1 and San Jacinto that's been designated to use the proceeds from that sale to pay down the principal, what is the status of that? I understand it's in litigation, but is there any chance it could be freed up soon?
Sorry, which property are you talking about, Homer?
Property on the corner of San Jacinto and Highway 1.
Oh, yeah, there's subject to negotiation still. I think we hopefully have some resolution in the next month or so.
Oh, great, because we've waited, Barbara, how long we waited for that?
Probably about 5 years. We discussed it about every 6 months, and then so someday we'll get an answer. Thanks, Scott. That'll help.
Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Homer, while you're live there, do you have any more questions on this item? We'll just go one by one here on this item.
Yeah, the only comment I wanted to make was if the police department plans to budgets for standby pay in the next fiscal year, they remember to include some amount of budgeted funds for the employee benefits that are associated with the standby pay.
Yep, and Sandy noted that to me as well, committee members as well as the chief, that we should probably start taking that into account so that there's not this question about this transaction, and it ends up being a very complicated transaction, so we would be better served to just assume those costs.
Right. Whatever, but just so they're budgeted.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right, Bart, do you have any questions or comments on this item?
No, John.
No? Okay, how about Lois?
Yeah, a couple. Just a couple of nitpicky things. The detail says that it's audited, and so that might be confusing to readers of the material. And then the other thing is that the detail lines are missing the second. You know, you can't read the full detail in the printout. Also, so if possible, I'd like to see that corrected in the next report, the next time we do this. And two questions I didn't get in early with respect to the detail. There was a 2019 Tahoe purchased, and I'm wondering if you can remind me, I didn't see that in the detail for what the original request was. So wondering what that was, as well as a correction for $14,000 on page 36 of the detail.
Okay. As far as the Tahoe, I believe that was part of the mid-year review.
Yeah, I wondered. I just couldn't remember. I couldn't find it. I looked online in all the minutes, and I didn't find it.
Yeah, it was a carryover from the prior year.
Oh, okay.
I thought they were going to buy in the prior year, but then they didn't, and so they had to add it afterwards.
Thank you. That sounds familiar now that you say that.
And then
That was for the school resource officer, and that was all part of the deal with the school district, where the school district was going to pay, but the city had to pay for the equipment. The school district was going to pay for the salaries, but the city paid for the equipment.
Thank you.
Okay.
And then, is it 36 of 38, or is it?
It's the 36 of the corrected detail.
Thanks. Let me just go grab it on my computer real quick.
It may also have been in the mid-year, and I looked, I just could not find those notes.
Got it. Let me just get to it on my computer. We were printing out 500 somethings when I went to go print out the corrected version.
It may have been in the second line detail, like I said, and it's just not visible. So
Yeah. If you want to go on, and while I search, I'd hate for dead air to be here.
yeah, those are the only questions I had. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, well, all right, then we'll move on. Barbara, did you have any questions or comments about this?
No, I thought it was very good. The budget for this year was consistent with last year, and also last year I see everything was correct. We had a big 294,000 carry forward plus that unreserved interest. So the numbers are still all consistent. It's just that we'll have nothing on the pavement management plan until we allocate it and can do it. So no, I think it's a good job. Everything's fine.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. And Tina?
Nope. Thank you.
Nothing? Okay. I had a couple things. One of the things I noticed, Katie, are you still looking for that other item?
I am, but I can amazingly do two things at once.
Okay. All right. Well,
Hopefully.
a couple of things about the police expenditures. One thing I noticed is that the billings that came from the county for the CLETS system, which is the police information system, the computer-aided dispatch stuff, basically the city had to pay for 6 quarters worth of expense in the fiscal year because the county had failed to actually bill for the final 2 quarters last year, and that's the reason why it was over budget. But it looks like even the quarterly charges are higher than what the city had anticipated. So for future budgeting, that's something I think you might need to scrutinize. And then the other thing in the police department, I noticed that there were 3 separate entries in your accumulated transaction listing for the month of June that you sent as follow-up that are described as reclassify expense from Measure Q in excess of police budget. And you end up with an actual expense in the police budget for Measure Q that exactly equals the budget. And I had never seen that done before. So we've had some years where a department has been over budget.
Yeah.
And it's been explained, like, for example, sometimes in the fire department, if they have a lot of mutual aid work, they'll go through equipment and they'll overspend, supplies and such. But this is the first time I've ever seen that action taken to align the actual with the budget. And I wonder, is that something that you did, or is that the approach you take, or how did that come about?
Yeah, so I can actually explain this one. So in past years, if there was an overage on one line item, but there was existing capacity in other line items, and that was a debate that you all had last year at the annual review of Measure Q expenses. At least last year, the agreement was that you were not going to move the expense back to the general fund because there was capacity in the Measure Q amounts available. Well, in this case, the police department had done such an excellent job of spending. They spent down to the penny on everything. I mean, I think there's a 10-cent difference or a $1 difference. And so that adjustment got them down to having spent, and you have two experts on the line in the chief and Bonnie Johnson, but they got down so close that adjustment was made so that they wouldn't overspend the totality of the Measure Q allotment that was made to them. And Chief and Bonnie, if there's anything you want to add or you want to modify my response, feel free.
No, thank you, Katie. I think that explains that we paid very close and particular attention to it in detail. So to make sure we stayed within budget.
And typically, I think that at least what I understand from Sandy is that it was typically not necessary to do just because of we've been closer in attention to where the dollars got accounted for. So in this case, a little bit extra got accounted for in Measure Q. And since that amount wasn't budgeted for the police department, it was moved back into the general fund.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I know it might make it kind of fuzzy in your bookkeeping to see adjustments like that going back and forth, but I think that's appreciated. Any comments from any of the CFAC members on that particular action? Okay, sounds like everybody's happy. Okay. The only other thing I had a question about was, and this is a small amount, it's $27, but there are entries for payments from the city to the state for use tax. And I just never have understood what that's for. What is the use tax on?
I am gonna not guess, although I think I have an educated guess, and I'd like to get back to you on that question.
Okay, it looks like it's a small allocation out of a bigger payment that goes to the state, and Measure Q is getting hit with an allocation somehow. And I just wonder, is that some kind of a pre-programmed percentage or something that may not directly relate to purchases or uses in Measure Q? It's just kind of an oddity to me.
Yep.
Okay. The other thing is in your report, in your narrative, you make a comment that regarding the fire department savings, the city was not awarded the grant for handheld radios, so there was no need to spend this funding for the local match on the grant. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that was from the prior year. I don't think there was $15,000 in the budget for handheld radios. Does anybody else on the committee remember this?
Do you want to provide any background? Because we talked about this issue.
There was part of the portion was a $14,000 matching grant for 10% for a Fire Act grant that was in last year's proposal.
Was it Chief Knuckles, was it in 1920 or 1819?
It was in both.
It was in both.
Yeah, we've been applying for multiple years for this one particular grant that we just haven't been successful with. It's a very highly competitive grant through the federal government.
Okay, I must have missed it because I looked back at the budget and I didn't see it in there for 1920.
It is in there. It's in my breakdown that I have. It was in my formal request.
Okay.
And John, the previous year, 18-19, we spent $31K on the fire equipment stuff.
Yeah.
John, you're right. It's not listed on pages E5 or E6, which of the budget, which is the breakdown of the various Measure Q expenditures.
Right, and it wasn't in the mid-year request either that I saw. So I just don't want you presenting something to the city council that could be misstated. That's all. I think one of the reasons why we meet and review this stuff before it goes to council is so that things that may be in error get corrected before it goes to council. Yep. So if that's something you could look into, Katie.
Yep. I made a note of it, and I'll follow up with Chief Knuckles and go back to what was actually budgeted both at mid-year and originally through the budget.
It may just be something that fell through the cracks.
Yep.
Okay. That was all I had on there. So if there's nothing else, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to public comments. Zeke, do we have anybody?
No, sir. At this time, there's nobody with their hand raised in the queue.
Okay, then I'll entertain a motion to receive and approve the report, and with the noted questions that Katie will come back. I guess, how do you want to work this, Katie? I mean, at some point we have to get a report to the city council, but rather do it in January than February. But if there are things that need to be corrected, it's going to have to come back to CFAC before that, right?
Yes. So my recommendation would be that I follow up on the issues. I saw the $14,000 general ledger correction item, and I need to follow up on what that specifically relates to. So I would recommend that the CFAC receive the report, and I can certainly bring it back on the meeting in January, which is the day before we publish for the council meeting for the next week, for the second meeting in January for the city council. And I heard that the chairperson usually gives a presentation, so we can have CFAC make those corrections if there are any that are necessary, based on the feedback that you get from us. And then you will put it back on the agenda for January for CFAC to take the official action.
Okay, and then between now and then, I can work those figures into the PowerPoint that Barbara has been using over the years and present that to CFAC in January.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I can work the final figures that you come up with into the report that Barbara has prepared in prior years, and that can go to CFAC in January and then to the city council at their second meeting.
Yeah, okay. That sounds great. And I haven't yet gotten to that phase of my research, so I don't know whether it's a written report or it's a PowerPoint or what format that takes, so I'll figure out what that is.
Okay, so then since there are a couple things still hanging out, that accrued interest expense or payable being one of them, do we really want to approve this at this time or wait until January?
John, so that we can multitask, I would say we could accept it as presented, pending, answer from the finance director on the few questions that were raised, which we will then incorporate into the, presentation that you make to City Council.
Okay, Barbara, that sounds like a motion to me.
Well, I was just making a suggestion. I can change that to a motion.
Please.
Okay, so I move that the committee accept the item B1 Measure Q report, subject to the outstanding questions which the interim finance director will respond to all CFAC members. And in fact, if these answers are simple and straightforward, this isn't part of the motion. This is my 2 cents. You may want to just do it all email so that John can incorporate that sooner than later into his PowerPoint, I assume, if that's what he does.
Okay. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Homer, thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, the motion carries 6-0.
Mr. Chairman, could I just confirm with the committee the questions that are your expectations so that we're all on the same page? So the accrued interest question, the question about the $14,000 on page 36, which I did find, the $27 in use tax allocation, just understanding what that's for, and double checking on the handheld radios and whether that was part of this year's allocation or whether we need to change the the reference in the report to the council.
I believe you captured all of them.
Great.
We talked about the standby pay and that, but that was not an action for an answer. That was just a suggestion, I think, for future reports.
Yep.
And Katie, I did find reference to the handheld radios on E7 for 2021, not for 1920.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so item B2, review the CFAC's work plan related to the water reclamation facility and confirm the schedule for a quarterly update review for calendar year 2021. And Scott, I believe you have this one.
Yeah, I'd be happy to kind of cover the high points of the staff report or just go to questions, whatever is your desire, Chair.
Well, we all received the staff report, and it looks like what you're talking about is just changing a couple of the a couple of the months that are dark. We're still going to have 7 meetings, but to more easily integrate it with the new quarterly report schedule from the Wharf project, we'll need to change our schedule a little bit to fit so we see it before the council gets it, right?
Correct, yeah, because we had the snafu where we weren't able to get you the most recent quarter end because really we were cutting it close to each month prior to, but especially with the amount of the volume of stuff coming through and the amount of due diligence required to ensure that the numbers are accurate. That adds additional time, and so what we're recommending is that CFAC reviews it approximately a month and a half after the close of the quarter, and then the council gets it the week after that. So it's adding essentially a month, and so that does change your overall schedule towards the second half of your year, where we're actually changing meeting dates, but it won't. In conformance with Katie and checking with the schedule and looking at previous years' agendas and talking with Homer, who had a nice little Excel spreadsheet, it won't impact the work plan for other non-WRF related items for CFAC.
Okay, so let's go ahead and go in reverse order this time on questions for Scott. Tina, do you have any questions for Scott?
No, this addresses one of the concerns we raised last time, so I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, Barbara?
You know, I just have one question, Scott. I saw in the council minutes somewhere recently on a procedural thing of when CFAC presents the Measure Q to council, and I thought there was language in there that says that has to be done, and it's always been in there, it has to be done 6 months after the close of the fiscal year, which always butts up to December 31st. But we've never, ever in my history been able to present anything in December. The council only meets once and we're waiting on, reports. So I don't know if you have a chance to change that language to 7 months or 8. I mean, I know that sounds long, but if we can't get the data and the review in December.
And you're saying that's on the council policy?
I think it was in the council policy,
okay.
Especially when you guys review all the, we reviewed the handbooks for all the boards recently, and I thought I had maybe mentioned it before, maybe I didn't follow up or it just didn't get, unless the language is in the, the measure that.
Right.
Well, the language in the measure refers to this meeting.
Just meetings? Okay.
The committee has to meet within 6 months of the close of the year. There's actually nothing in the measure that talks about ever presenting to the city council, actually.
Oh, okay.
There is, in the municipal code, though, there is something, I believe, 3.22 that Katie cited in one of the reports here, I think says we're supposed to actually provide the report within 6 months.
Yeah, I thought I read it somewhere, Homer. I'm just not sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Lois?
Just a comment to thank the council and Scott for their work I really appreciate it. And also appreciation to Director McPherson requesting the graph showing the impact on user rates from various decisions. I thought that was insightful and look forward to receiving that.
Okay, thank you, Lois. Bart?
Yeah, I look forward to being able to actually address these issues. I understand that what's being presented is literally just the outline of what will be discussed in the future. I think it's very unfortunate that we did not have the most current forecast at our last meeting before the election, but that's water under the bridge at this point. Also, in my judgment, this is what I used to do for a long time. You didn't necessarily have to have the most current costs. Also, there's nothing written in stone that says the scheduled date and the cost through date have to be the same thing. In other words, costs can be as of some date, but schedule you literally can have the day before. You can status the schedule. And what's really important at this point is the schedule. There's clearly some concerns relative to the rebaseline schedule and where we are now. So I think having, this is what I did for a living. So you do not have to have the schedule there. So having the schedule be as current as possible. So if you're a month and a half behind on the dollars, that's fine. But then that, in my opinion, you'd be like 2 weeks behind, say, on the schedule information.
Okay, thank you, Bart. Homer, anything more on this?
Well, I think I interpreted this staff report as being two issues. Number one, just approving the new schedule, or the meeting schedule.
Right.
And number two, I thought that we would discuss the 4 bullet points that the mayor asked us to review at the city council's January 28th meeting. Am I mistaken in the way you were interpreting the staff report?
No, I think that's correct. But Scott can correct me if I'm wrong, but we really haven't seen anything in complete form from the city that covers all 4 of those items, correct?
Yeah, 2 out of the 4 are covered in the WRF quarterly report, but the items 2 and 3, which are somewhat defined in terms of what it'll look like when it comes back to and what sources of information we're going to be pulling from, what we need to make good recommendations and outline options, most likely would be a single point in time and is predicated upon the completion of the SRF process. And so, hopefully, if there's discussion, it's really around item 2, 3 to make sure we're bringing the right information for CFAC to make a good recommendation to council in terms of use of loans versus cash and what our options will be if we have some elasticity. What's the best pursuit?
John, I think I'd like to discuss each one of these if that's possible, because I'm not sure that everybody's totally clear on what the mayor intended for us to really do with each one of these items.
Okay, well, Scott, do you want to go through them?
Yeah, sure. I'm very interested and involved with these, and I'm glad that Scott corrected the original wording that went out. I think that whether I agree or not with the items, I think it was pretty clear on what the intent is. So we have an awful lot to talk about relative to the forecast and where we are relative to sources and uses and funds. So there's a lot to go into these, the budget or the use of funds, the possible Bartle wells. Scott has said that might not be till spring of next year, which could easily mean summer. So, I mean, if there's some misunderstanding, if the wording is not clear, then I guess we need to clear it up. I felt, whether I agree with what's there or not, I thought the wording was clear on what the 4 items were meant to be.
Right. And thanks, Bart. And, I took from what council has stated and stated again to discuss items 1 and 4. That's what they believe is the way to ensure that those items are covered. As Bart said, there may be disagreement about that, but that's what council has said they want to see. What's still open, really open, is items 2 and 3, because we still don't have all the information, and it's going to be a lot of work and really quickly, sort of. So we just want to lay the groundwork and make sure we're thinking about the items that would need to be wrapped into that discussion.
Item number 2. My understanding of item number 2 is has to do with redeploying some of the city's existing cash to other purposes and increasing the amount of money that was borrowed from the state. And I've worked up a future agenda item that I wanted to discuss at the end of the meeting to actually get very specific about that topic, and so we could start the discussion amongst ourselves for both the public, and then something we could pass on to the city council, because it would be a pretty big deal. And it's not something that the community would understand immediately. And item number 3 has to do with, I think the way I interpret it is for this committee and for the city council to be able to monitor the cash flow. And the staff report referred us to a new table in the quarterly WRF report. It's on page 107 of our agenda today. And I think this report is really lacking and doesn't have enough information on it, for me at least, to be able to say, yeah, this is going the way it's supposed to, or no, it's not. And I'd like to make some modifications to this new table 16. I don't suppose anybody can see this table that I printed.
What's the agenda item? I thought the agenda item.
Oh, this is the same agenda item, Bart. This is the tail. This is the quarterly SRF report is attached to this agenda item. It's the tail of it.
I asked about that from Scott because I was confused. That is not part of this agenda, as I understand it. That was there simply for reference.
Correct. And it's reference to say if for this very purpose, right? Homer, if you feel that this table is not, let's not talk about what it actually says, but the form. If the form is insufficient, this is the time to discuss that.
This is the time to discuss that?
Yeah. Like I said, the council was pretty happy with where things are at, but if there's an overwhelming sense from the committee that this is insufficient to show that we are, rapidly and quickly as possible, submitting to WIFIA and get on a 3-week cycle so that we get paid as quickly as possible. That if there's more information than needed to prove that we're doing our job, then this would be the time to discuss that.
I was just suggesting adding a couple columns to it, and there's a couple columns on here that I'm not even sure are needed, to just get a little more, a little more detail. One of the questions I asked prior to the meeting was the number of invoices that are processed each month, and the answer I got was between 4 and 12. So basically an average of 8, which is to me a very manageable very manageable number. And I think the report should include the date the invoice was received by the city, the date the invoice was submitted to either the state or the federal government, and the date that the money was transferred to the city's account, just those 3 columns. And the reason I say that is I think, was it our last meeting, there was a discussion about the fact that an invoice was sent to Washington and they never got it. Some technology problem, as one example. Another example is the footnote at the bottom of this new table talks about reimbursement number 3 for the SRF planning loan was originally submitted in December of 2019 and was resubmitted in October. Well, somewhere that must have fallen through the cracks. And the point here is that not that the city's earning a lot of interest on its cash, but it is earning something. And if these invoices get hung up someplace because they're on somebody's desk or somebody's on vacation, and the size of these invoices are such that the city is losing potential interest income, which is what I think the mayor had stated in his point when he made it a year ago. And if this report included just a couple more columns, I think everybody would feel more comfortable that these things were processing as planned.
Yeah, I don't know if I can do
I'm not following the agenda.
Yeah.
The agenda, as I understood on this item, was to review the explanations of the work plan, I guess they're calling it, the resolution work plan proposed a year ago by Mr. Heading. And this is basically, we had gone this long without ever getting some clarification on what he meant. My understanding was this is what that is. Now, if we want to get into all these details, trust me, I could keep us here all night on that. So if Homer is proposing some modified wording of the explanations, that to me is part of this agenda item. But to jump, or if you want to add another item at the end of the meeting, but I don't see where, like I said, there's a lot of details that could go into each one of these. So am I misunderstanding what this agenda item is, John?
Well, I'm going to defer to Scott on this because this was one that Scott requested to have on here. So, and he prepared the report. So, Scott, what's your thought on that?
My thought is that we hopefully, the hope was here that we wouldn't be talking about the form of the information any longer because it's been going on for over a year now. And there was discussions about subcommittees and the like to look at things and develop things more. And, they didn't go anywhere, and council's been clear that they're pretty satisfied with how things look. I don't know how we would be able to do all the invoices on a quarterly basis and not make that the entire report, because you'd have to have each invoice listed, and that could be very lengthy. So, I guess if the will of the CPAC is that as any of these things are insufficient, you can always make that case to council. Ultimately, what I was trying to do is just set this is what it is. And if there's a feeling that's not right, then that can be the will of this committee and go back to council. We can have the discussion again with them.
Well, I was just trying to, my interpretation of the mayor's comment or what was voted by the city council was review of cash flow performance to maximize use of funds available versus time use of money. And I think that's basically saying, let's be sure the invoices are processed timely. That's all. Mm-hmm. And as long as everybody's comfortable with this, what I don't think is a very useful piece of information, that's fine.
What wording, Homer, in this document are you proposing to change? And did you suggest that earlier on? Like on number 4, you're apparently presuming or wanting to propose wording that gets more specific in what was somewhat of a general discussion on what Mr. Heading was looking for. So I think if you want to propose wording changes, now getting into what a table looks like and what column headings are and what font you use, you know.
Okay, we never had a chance to, this report was added, we were never asked to look at the report to see if we thought it was worth it. You know, it provides the information for us to go ahead and satisfy the mayor's request, that's all. We can move on, John.
Okay, well, how about if, since we really haven't had a complete report yet on all of the elements, and we're still waiting for the SRF construction loan, which is going to play heavily into this whole thing. How about if we just wait until the next quarterly report review to hash out those details and make recommendation on improvements if we don't see what we think needs to be there for us to do our work. I have to tell you, I think that this is going to be 99% staff and consultants and 1% CFAC because, well, I mean, when you're looking at something like the impact on rates, we're going to be completely dependent on Bartle Wells to provide that information to us. And we're going to look at it and it's going to either be thumbs up or thumbs down. But I mean, we're not going to be doing any kind of analysis or number crunching on what Bartle Wells does, right?
Right.
What we're more interested in is the big picture items and questions like, with the available resources, are we going to have enough money to complete the project? Are we going to have to curtail one water projects, or are they all going to be fully funded? Or like you mentioned, Homer, to loan money to other funds and maximize the loans coming from federal and state sources? I mean, one of the questions I had was, why the heck would you have to have a $105 million loan from SRF when you've already got $61 million and $10 million? I mean, you're at that point, you're well above what the construction cost is for the project, something in the neighborhood of 30 plus million more. So there's a lot of questions like that we can take a look at. But as far as the detail analysis work, it's going to be done by staff and the consultants.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we're not looking for CFAC to come over the analysis to see if we did it right, did it correctly. We're asking CFAC to weigh in a policy level discussion. And I think that's the intent with all of these items that the mayor submitted, and it's the full council that approved it 5-0. So it's not necessarily the mayor's call, it's the whole council. And the whole council has repeatedly said, we want a big picture view of how the project's moving, and they felt the fourth quarterly report in some respects has too much information. So I'm just trying to be the conduit and not trying to frustrate desires, but just sort of express back what your council is requested, and they want to have the same review that you have. Your point about the SRF 105 is just what the state granted us. I mean, we're not going to spend $105 million plus the 61 plus cash plus grants. It's just that's what they offered us, and so really it's an opportunity to see what's the best blend of cash and loans, and does that provide us opportunities to maximize more investment in One Water, to look at, loaning to other city needs or paying down rates or something else. I think that's where we're going to look to CFAC to tell us, or to tell council, what you think is the most responsible use of those funds, if there is any excess funds, if you will, made available through the SRF process. Homer's point about the drawdown, making sure we do that efficiently, I'm all over that. I mean, Katie and I talk about it every single day. I'm on the phone with the administrators, and I'm cracking the whip on staff on SRF, but I can't make them work any harder because they are working as hard as they can. It's the SRF staff who are all working at home, which has delayed this process. And the SRF planning loan had to be resubmitted because they needed more information. But we've submitted on time, and we're still waiting for our money. So I think, again, we're doing the best we can. And I'm hoping that report at least shows you how frequently we're submitting for reimbursement. And if there's a feeling that could be tweaked a little bit more, I'm sure a council would be willing to hear that. I'm not trying to shut that down. I'm just saying that the council's expressed desires to have high level information just to get a sense of how things are moving along in flag areas of concern.
So Scott
did a nice job before saying, I think she was all over the returns, which was very nice to hear. And I think it is consistent with what I'm talking about. There's some caveat little words in there. One is the WIFI loan, you keep saying up to. Clearly, it would be beneficial to maximize any low interest loans we get to maximize the One Water Plan funding. The other thing that so I don't know what up to means. The other one that I thought I'd heard somewhere along the way was SRF said they would give us a loan up to the amount of WIFIA, meaning 62.5 possibly. So is that a misunderstanding or a change in the understanding of how the SRF works? Is it possible, not that we would necessarily want all that money, but is it possible that we could go above 62.5 from SRF?
Great question, Bart. I don't know if they have, since WIFIA is really new and there's only a few co-projects that have WIFIA and SRF funding, it's a bit of a blank slate. I think they maybe have made those statements, but it's not in law. I say up to because it is really a line of credit. WIFIA is a line of credit up to $61 or $62 million. Of course, we plan to spend every dollar we can on a low interest loan of 0.83%. With SRF is hovering around 0.9%. So it's extremely advantageous that we get as much and use as much of our loans as possible. And then the question is, what level are they going to allow us to take on? And that hasn't been determined yet. So that's going to drive a lot of discussion. If they allow us to take a loan out for the remainder of the cost of the project, that'd be fantastic. And that'd provide us a lot of latitude, but we don't necessarily control the cards on that. So I think they've made statements to that effect in the past, but I don't believe it's a hard, fast rule yet.
Okay, thank you, Scott. So the next time we will review a quarterly report will be at our February meeting?
Yeah, the February for the close of the second quarter. And I'll talk to Eric. I think what I heard Bart say earlier is perhaps the schedule information could be closer up to speed, but the financial would be at the close of the quarter. Is that what you were suggesting, Bart? I want to make sure I heard that.
Yes. You can literally get schedule information very current because it just means you have a status meeting.
Right.
Cost information, you're dependent on financial records coming in and invoices and a lot of other things that you have to deal with.
Okay. I think I'll see if we can pull that off since there is a delay now.
Okay. So can we now turn our attention back to the scheduling question? I had just one question about that, and it is that for the period of June through October, that's a 5-month period, we're going to have one meeting. So we're actually dark June and July, meet in August, and then we're dark again September, October. Is that acceptable to the committee members and to the city?
I'll just weigh in if I've had it with another committee where we've had one or two special meetings just based on what's going on this year. It's the tourism committee, and obviously things are very fluid there. So if something were to pop up middle of that break, I mean, we can always do something along those lines. Just offering that out there.
Okay, I just want to make sure that everybody's aware of that.
John, I have a clarification question.
Sure.
I wasn't part of some of this being relatively coming up on my first year. I wasn't really aware or smart enough to understand why we changed these meetings to begin with, because when I joined, there were more meetings originally for CPAC. I was assuming it was because we presumed that we would have less work to do.
I think part of it was really to relieve the staff of some of the hours that they were dedicating to the CFAC.
Got it.
And still being able to get our work done. You know, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think Homer was part of the driving force behind this, so maybe he has an additional reason or two. Homer, do you want to comment on that?
No, your comments are correct. I mean, there was no sense in, we had 7 meetings is enough to cover the workload, and why burden the staff with having to prepare the reports, et cetera, for, additional meetings really weren't necessary.
Okay. And then if, like Scott said, if something does come up, we can have a special meeting.
Right, like the city council does.
Right.
Okay.
And I'll make a comment on that, John. Part of my reason supporting that is over the years, sometimes it's hard to get people to apply for these citizens boards when there's, a lot of meetings or a perception of a lot of work. So if we could do what we had done in 12 meetings in 7, especially since we could see the direction on some of these reviews were going more at a higher level, then that might entice more people to apply.
Thank you, Barbara.
So I have another question, and it's back to WRF and the reporting. So based on how many times we've talked about items 1 through 4 and how many times we've bogged ourselves down in the mire of this discussion, I'm remaining hopeful that we are going to be able to get organized enough to feel like we can routinize this discussion and get through it relatively quickly in the time we've allowed for our meetings. And I'm somewhat concerned about doing that, and mainly because obviously many of you have more experience than I do, and there's a lot of leaping around in these conversations sometimes for someone like myself. But it still seems to me like there's constantly this clarification or reclarification concern about what is meant. So if I understood Scott's email to us, we were, and to Bart's point and to Homer, we're to discuss that we all agree that the definition of item 1, 2, 3, and 4, we are in agreement with what is stated, and we believe we know what it means. Is that right?
That was the goal, Tina?
That's what I thought, because I thought you made it clear in your email. And so, okay. Alrighty. So then basically we're going to wait for the next meeting, which will have the next WRF report for us, quarterly report, and we can prepare in advance based on what we understand these 4 things to be and send our questions in if we have them, hopefully in advance. And maybe that will help us routinize this conversation going forward in the CFAC meetings. Okay,
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Clarification on that. The next time we review WRF, as I think John mentioned, is February, and the review of the rate issues will not be before the spring. I suspect personally that that's probably going to get closer to the summer because there's a lot of detail. It would be nice if we could weigh in with at least our thoughts on, how do we maximize the use of these low interest loans? But it's not next month. So again, the WRF report is February, and the review of items, 2 and 3, aren't going to be for 4 or 5 months. And I think that Jennifer was off and running relative to item 4.
Yeah, and item 2 and 3 could be earlier than spring, and it could be February. I'm just trying to set expectations that it could be longer based on what I've been told and then what's happened several times with the state. So not trying to cast aspersions on them. I know they're working hard, but you're right. It could be as late as spring or summer. I'm hoping that it's going to be earlier than that.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
The spring was your quote, and then it's Terrell Bay News. That's where I got that.
Yeah, right.
Thanks for that clarification, both of you.
Okay, so I think the only official thing we need to do today is to change the schedule.
Yeah, it'd be good to get that support for that. So we'll take that forward when council adopts it.
Okay, so can I get a motion to change our schedule according to the schedule that Scott has in his report here?
John, I'll move that we make a motion to accept the schedule as presented with the option of a special meeting during the year if needed.
Okay.
And I'll second it. This is Lois.
Okay, Lois. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries 6-0. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to item B3, which is a review of the fiscal year 2021 first quarter investment report. Katie?
Yes, the investments are yielding minimal returns. They are in compliance with the investment policy that's adopted by the City Council. I provided an explanation of why we think it's prudent to leave as many dollars in those funds as they are currently. And I'm happy to take whatever questions I can answer and come back to you with anything else.
Okay. So let's go through the list here again. Homer, any questions?
I just have a comment, 2 comments. When Katie presents this to the City Council, I think she needs to make a big deal about the fact that the city's got over $37 million in cash. There's a lot of folks think the city's going broke, and considering that the amount of cash that's available would indicate that's not the case. And the other comment I want to make is, if I recall correctly, didn't Ms. Callaway tell us in a recent meeting that the LIFA fund had a maximum of $30 million? I don't remember if that was correct or not. But if that is correct, and considering that there's currently, well, I realize this is September 30th, but $10 million in basically non-interest-bearing demand deposit accounts, I would go ahead and try to keep as much money in LIFAs, even though it's only 68 basis points, as much money in LIFA as possible, so that you can draw down. And, you know, the difference between 25.6 and 30 million is 30 grand. I mean, it's better than a poke in the eye, right?
Mm-hmm. With a sharp stick, too.
Right. That's it, John.
Hey, Homer, thank you. Bart, any comments?
No, I think Homer's making a good point. I agree with him.
Okay, Lois?
Yeah, I had just similar questions because I'm not familiar with LIFA, but one of the questions is if there's a limit on the withdrawal, or is it like a demand account? And if so, your memo states that the average portfolio is 0.617, but really what we're comparing it to is that sweep and market account, which is 0.01%. And if you take $5 million over a year, at the difference between the LIFA account and the money market account is $33,000. And I know that doesn't sound like a huge amount of money, but when we're running so tight, it's just a point of observation is all, because not all that money is can really be averaged. That's all.
Okay, Lois, thank you. Barbara?
Agree with all the comments. The only other thing I noticed is in our March 30th meeting, our weighted average was a lot higher. It was 1.96 with a LEAF 2.03. So we're always just hanging right in there. But due to the fact that the interest rates are doing what they are, that Mechanics Bank needs to, I would suggest, since they're all daily things, just move as much as you can.
Okay. Tina?
No comment. I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. In answer to your question, I think LAIF did have a $3 million limit at one time, but that was years ago. I don't know what the current one is. But I know that LAIF does have a daily or same day withdrawal capability. So it's not like the money gets stuck there for long periods of time.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so Katie, any comments or answers to any of the questions or statements that were brought up?
I will do a double check on the limitations. If there are limitations, my Google search is letting me down right now on LAIF. Whether there are limits to how much money you can put in LAIF. And I will let the let the committee know what the answer to that is. And I will also just do a double check with staff to make sure that we're maximizing the amount in LAIF as opposed to in the money market account or in the sweep account. And again, just a reminder that this is from September 30, so we may have changed our position since then.
Okay. And to Bart's point, not Bart, Homer's point about the amount of 36.7 million, September 30th of last year, so exactly 1 year ago, it was 26.3 million. So $11.3 million more now. So that's a good development. It's a good year-over-year change.
Yeah. We just want to also remember that that represents all the money that, we're floating for the WRF project.
Sure.
So.
Understood.
And my Google search has helped me out here. And it says that there's a $75 million deposit limit on regular LAIF accounts. And so I'll just double check regular versus irregular, which I don't know the distinction. So we'll get back to you on that.
Okay. All right,
Katie,
thank you.
Scott, who makes these decisions and or approves them? Can Katie just, look at how we're investing our money? Does she come to you and then you would say, looks good, do you need to go to the council? Or how many people need to be involved to optimize, basically do what Homer's suggesting?
And my understanding is I have the authority to do that. I've talked to the city manager about any additional actions that would be asked of me to maximize returns, and I don't feel comfortable taking on that responsibility. So the LAIF, making sure that we've got as much as we need, but not more, in our sweep account and in our money market accounts, and maximizing the amount at LAIF is within the city finance director's authority, is the short answer.
Yeah, for you, it's just a single signature withdrawal. I mean, you just call them up by 9:30 in the morning and you're an authorized person and you get the money transferred.
Right. And just to be clear, so that in case this is relevant, right now, Sandy and Val do that responsibility on a week-by-week basis to ensure that we've got the cash to cover payroll on payroll weeks and to cover invoices that we're planning to pay for. So as an interim, we've really made sure that the permanent staff has that responsibility and authority, which I think is a best practice.
Okay. So do I have a motion to approve the quarterly investment report?
I'll motion to approve the quarterly.
Okay. Moved by Lois. Do we have a second?
I'll second, Barbara.
Okay, Barbara. Thank you. And before I forget, is there any public comment on this item?
No, sir. Not at this moment.
Okay, thank you. So all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries 6-0. Okay, item B4, fiscal year 2021 first quarter budget performance and status report for the quarter ending September 30th, 2020. Katie, this already went to the city council.
That is absolutely correct.
So our input really is going to be a little perfunctory, but because this is not going to go back to city council. So pretty much this will just be our comments to you for if we see anything that we think would be worthy of improvement or clarification or just answered questions for future editions.
Correct.
Or just to get our own questions answered. So I believe there was some questions submitted ahead of time. One having to do with revenue sources in the general fund and about property tax. So I guess at this point you don't want to change anything on property tax because the county hasn't given you any kind of direction or indication.
Yeah, I mean, they've given us additional projections, but as you all know, the property tax bills were paid theoretically in December. They're late now. And so we haven't received any receipts. And so I think it's prudent to wait until we have some actual data on which to make that decision.
Yeah, because with the COVID, there's a potential that there could be a lot of delinquencies.
Yep.
Now, the city's on the teeter plan, I believe, though, with the county, right? So the city gets the full amount and the county deals with the delinquencies on the regular property tax?
I believe that's correct, yes.
Okay. Except I think the way it works is if the delinquencies get to be too great, then the county actually has the ability to just drop you from the teeter plan.
Right.
So hopefully that won't happen. But as long as the city stays on the teeter plan, then the property tax revenue should be fairly predictable. Okay, let's see. Were there any other questions about this? Let's just start with Tina.
Sorry for that delay. No, I sat through the city council meeting and I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tina. Barbara?
No, very thorough. Thanks for the explanation.
Okay. Lois?
Yeah, just a quick one, curiosity really. For the police department parking repair, we're asking for $70,000, and it mentioned a $10,000, reimbursement from a neighbor who damaged the parking lot. I just wondering about the $60,000 difference there. That was the only comment.
Looks like Chief Cox is available to answer that question.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. So when they were putting in the new coffee shop, the Human Being, directly across from our police department, the company that was setting that building asked to use the parking lot to bring in a large crane that would be utilized to lift that building off of another truck and set it into place. Well, when they set that crane in the parking lot, the outriggers, due to the weight of both the truck itself and the building they were lifting, damaged several areas within that parking lot. So the $10,000 is what the repair costs would be just to repair the damage caused from the weight of the crane and the truck, damaging the wire sensors in the ground that operate the electronic gate, and that type of thing. We had been planning to redo that parking lot for some time because it had never been done. It's mostly gravel. It's really a dilapidated parking lot, and it's something that we use every day. We store employee vehicles and several of our volunteer vehicles, our motorcycles, radar trailers, and a lot of our equipment. We have an evidence annex over there as well. So the difference is that $10,000 is the repairs that it would take to repair the lot from the damage, but we didn't see a sense in them going in and doing the repair while we were planning to do the parking lot itself. Otherwise, we would have to go over the repairs that they had just done. So that $10,000 is a contribution for the damage that was done by the contract company when setting the building.
Got it. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Lois. Bart?
I have no questions. Thanks, John.
Okay. Homer?
I don't have any questions. I do have some requests, though. for the second quarter budget performance report that I'm guessing we'll receive in February. Could the WRF budget that was included on page 28 of the performance report or page 162 of our agenda, could that be updated so it's in sync with the WRF quarterly report? The expenditures in the WRF quarterly report were 6.5 million, and on this it's 1.6 million. That's number one. Number two, and I asked this before, and I guess it never got done. The account descriptors are not very good, and they need to be cleaned up. So, for the general public that looks at this, they probably don't understand when you look at account number 7103, phase. What phase? What? What is that? As an example, there's a half a dozen others that probably could be cleaned up, and so this would become a meaningful report. And if that can't be accomplished because there's not enough time or whatever, I just wouldn't include it.
And Homer, may I ask just clarifying question? Where are you on this particular report that's included?
I'm on page 28 of the budget performance report. Quarterly budget performance, first quarter.
Katie, I know exactly where he's at. I can point it out to you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it is the most generic line item I've ever seen. 3 million, hey, it's phase, okay? Don't you know what that means?
Well, and also 7107 is the overland construction contract, and so far we haven't spent any money at all this year. So it's awfully nice of those guys out there working to volunteer.
They're great people.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hopefully, for the second quarter report, Katie, you're going to get a chance to do some financial projections.
Yes, because not only will the second quarter report be timely then, but also the mid-year review.
Yeah.
John, do we bring the 10-year forecast to CFAC? I don't recall if we did that or not.
Yes, you have in the past, but
Okay.
with our schedule, I don't know if that's going to really work out.
Okay, we'll see if we can pull it off.
Yeah, it'd have to be at the February meeting because we don't meet in March. So
Yeah, because council discusses the mid-year and the 10-year, the second meeting in February. So that could probably work out.
Okay.
you're going to add that to Katie's workload, huh?
Sorry.
I'm not gonna switch my account.
Don't quit on me yet.
That's over.
Okay. Hey, Katie, did you get the question that I submitted about the water and sewer revenues and the delinquencies affecting revenues?
Yes, I did. Sandy and I had a back and forth on it, and then I wasn't able to speak to her this morning because she was out of the office. And so I'm not grasping the concepts as easily as you and she seem to understand them about the accounts receivable portion of it. So I was hoping that maybe the three of us could have a conversation about it, just so that, one, I could learn what you all are talking about, because the question, and maybe you want to explain the question, because I don't want to.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's just you're having a big ramp up in delinquencies because of COVID. So your customers aren't paying their water and sewer bills in a timely manner like they should be. And you thought that has affected the water and sewer revenues. But my point is that actually the way it works is it's very similar to a private sector accounting. As soon as you make the sale, you record the sale. And in the case of water and sewer, as soon as you generate that bill, that is a revenue. That gets booked as a revenue. And then, of course, the offsetting account is receivable. And when people don't pay their bill, the receivable just stays there hanging out and never turns into cash, but the revenue is still the same. So the revenues are generated when you do the billing, and the delinquencies really don't affect revenues. So if revenues are down, it's got to be because you aren't selling as much water to somebody.
Yep. And answer was yes, there is some reduction in demand and use. The hotels aren't as full. We don't have as many visitors coming to town. The restaurants aren't as fully operational as they have been. So there's definitely some changes to the use pattern. And so, yes, there is that element of it for sure.
Okay, because that's something, when Bartle Wells did their rate analysis, that was one of the things that they factored in, was that with higher rates, there was going to be less consumption. And they factored in a certain amount. But if it turns out that, actual experience shows that the reduction in consumption is greater, then that may affect their future rate calculations, and that's going to be part of, I guess, what we're going to be looking at in future quarterly reports. So something to be mindful of, I think.
I have just a follow-on comment to that, John. If the revenue is growing and that means people aren't paying their bills, is there an adequate provision for bad debt?
Well, that would be, that's a good question. I don't know what the city does in regards to that, but that'd be something to keep an eye on, sure.
Yeah, there is an accounting process that's used to write off debt that, and I'm not sure I'm using the exact right words, but we used it with the harbor fund because of the rent deferrals that were permitted last fiscal year. And so there is an accounting provision, and again, Sandy could explain this in greater detail and probably more accurately, but my understanding is that there's an offset on the balance sheet that is entered so that doesn't skew the amount that it looks like we received in cash, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it's a net receivable after the provision is normally how that looks. Yeah. And that's what I'm asking to make sure that it's matching what you do in accrual accounting.
Right.
So thank you.
Yeah. And it looks like Joe may have popped in. He may have some information about some of this in detail that I don't have.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. The only thing I really wanted to mention is that we have been talking with the state, and we are not holding out a whole lot of hope, but they are talking about helping us get some help to reimburse us for our bad debt. And currently, we have about 350 delinquent accounts, and we're running about 150 to 200,000 delinquent right now. And we just talked with the state the other week, and again, they're looking at some sort of program to help us get current on those back delinquent accounts.
Are the city utilities one of the bad debts that's transferred to the property tax rolls? I can't remember. I know something. Was it the garbage fees? I can't remember what was transferred.
In Morro Bay, we don't transfer the utilities to the tax rolls. I can tell you that.
Okay.
The water utility.
It must be just garbage.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on that issue?
Yeah, what happened to Joe's hair?
Somebody finally said it.
Okay, are there any public?
The mayor said it first. The mayor mentioned it a while back. So this is the first time
I must have missed that one. That's too bad.
Any public comments, Zeke?
No, sir, not at this time.
Okay, thank you. We're getting close to the end here, so let's go to item C, future agenda items.
So So I do know that we're planning to bring the CAFR to you in January. We have had a little hiccup in terms of the timing of receiving the CAFR. The firm that was doing it lost its primary accountant who was assigned to Morro Bay, and so we're working with them. We have applied for and received an extension from GFOA to be able to apply for the award. And we are doing our best to work with the firm under very difficult circumstances. The individual who was extraordinarily, Sandy said that he's the best auditor that she's ever worked with in terms of the thoroughness and being able to track the materials that we've provided and being tough on us and not just letting us slide, but has left the firm for medical reasons. And so there's not much we can do to assist. Sandy is working diligently and tirelessly to finalize the CAFR. And again, I can't write the MD&A, and we can't finalize the transmittal letter until we have a draft that's at least gone through one phase of review. So,
have they done their field work?
Yes, they did their field work. They did their preliminary field work, and then they also did the field work in, I'm trying to remember if it was August or September. It must have been September. And they did it all virtually this year. So.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And do you have anything else that you have on your list there?
I do believe that in January, we will, not for January, it was for the budget process. I'm still trying to map it out, but it definitely aligns with your schedule. I know in February we'll be bringing you the mid-year and potentially the 10-year forecast.
So for the January meeting, it's just a matter of providing us with the budget calendar. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I guess we have to finalize the Measure Q before it goes to the City Council.
And the way I interpreted the motion was, if I give you the information and that's satisfactory, then we don't need to bring that back in January.
Okay, but usually what we do is what Barbara has done in the past is she does the full PowerPoint presentation to CFAC.
Oh, I understand.
Just to go through once and then before it goes to the City Council. So that's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
And is there anything else going to be on the agenda?
I have a future agenda item.
Okay, shoot.
This goes back to our item B2, number 2, about service recommendations related to the WIFI and state revolving fund sources for the WR program. I know we talked about getting into this at a later date, but what I want to do is propose an agenda item that we could maybe discuss at a future meeting, not necessarily January, but it's really important that we get the subject discussed in public because it's pretty complex. So what I'm proposing is a 4-part request for a potential staff report. The first item would be an explanation of CalPERS charges at the beginning of the fiscal year of the city's unpaid balances for the various pension funds to include the current interest rate and the dollar amounts involved for the 2020 year, 2021 year, and any future years that might be available. Ms. Calloway tried to explain that to me, and I don't quite understand exactly what interest the city is charged on exactly what are the unfunded the balances. So getting an understanding of that would be very helpful, I think. The second part is, are there any issues with the state if the city decides to substitute additional Clean Water Act SRF borrowed funds to complete the WRF versus the city's existing cash, using the city's existing cash? Third point is it legal for the general and harbor funds to borrow cash from the city's own utility funds to be used for non-utility funded expenses? Fourth, what would be the anticipated net annual savings to the general and harbor, water, and sewer funds if a portion of the CalPERS liability was reduced? And this comes back to Bart's earlier comment, maximize low-interest loans. I think that that's going to take time to really get for the staff to develop a good staff report that'll inform us for our discussion, and most importantly, the first discussion in a public forum before the city council gets their hands on it. This will be something that a lot of people won't understand, but anytime we can borrow money at 1% to pay off debt at 7%, it seems to me like, kind of a no-brainer.
Homer, what was the second item? Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Are there any issues with the state if the city decides to substitute additional Clean Water Act SRF borrowed funds to complete the WRF versus the city's existing cash? In other words, if you go ahead and, as John mentioned earlier, you need 35 or 40 grand to finish the project. But if you use borrowed money to do the entire balance beyond WIFIA, can you go ahead and use the amount of cash the city has for something other than a WRF project? Do you get your hands slapped and, put on a blacklist or something like that? Because obviously you'd be using the loan to do exactly what you were borrowing the money for, which is to build a sewer plant. But it's a little deceptive. Do they care?
Good question.
I don't know. These questions are not, in my mind, the reason I bring it up today is they're not simple and require work. And I realize that there's going to be some costs involved because you've got the legal department and has to give an opinion. But I think the sooner this conversation takes place, the better it'll be. But it could be it could be a significant savings to the city. Did I get a thumbs up for Lois? Lois, turn on and say thumb up. Help on this, because I usually get blown out on my stuff.
Well, Scott and Katie, I think in general you can probably be able to borrow up to the full construction cost, wouldn't you?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, Bart asked the same question, so we don't know what the rules are. We're still figuring that out.
Sorry.
And the question came up about borrowing from other funds. The last council meeting, and we can. You have to draw up a loan agreement. You have to charge interest. It could be favorable to the water, and it should be favorable to the water and sewer fund if funds were borrowed from another fund, it'd be paid back at a higher interest rate than you can earn on the market. So it's been done before in other cities, as far as I know, but you would have to, again, create an agreement, and obviously have to be something that the CFAC would feel was a reasonable use of funds and something that council would have to agree to. But definitely can be done. But your other questions are the CalPERS ones, that's going to take some time. We certainly can do that if that's something that CFAC would want us to do, or we can just sort of bring that at the same time we look at the whole package. We can do that together. So up to the committee.
I think the thing with the CalPERS is you can do a pretty quick calculation based on their discount rate but that doesn't really give you the whole picture, because over the long term, it's going to depend on what their actual earnings are. And that's going to affect how much your future contributions will be.
Well, in the short term, though, the way she explained it to me was that, and this is why I wanted to get it as a future agenda item, because I don't understand it. But let's hypothetically say that the city, and I could be totally nuts on this, but the city's anticipated expenses for this current fiscal year are $2 million, all citywide, to cover all the employees' CalPERS costs. And the city pays 7% interest on that $2 million. That's amortized over the course of the 26 pay periods. Is that correct? Something like that. Scott's shaking his head yes. So if you pay down, could you avoid that interest charge on that $2 million? But there's also other funds. There's some side funds, I think, that still exist. There's the unfunded, there's a lot to what we pay CalPERS. That you got to remember that Jennifer Calloway went to a 3-day seminar to do nothing but talk about CalPERS.
Homer, they do the work for you. In their annual report that shows their valuation report, it shows how much your unfunded liability is.
I know that.
Okay, and it shows how much you would need to pay for the year if you paid it up front, and it shows how much you would have to pay in each payroll if you paid it all during the year, and the total, what that would be. And so just the difference between the two is what the savings is. Well, they have that all written out in their report every year. Of course, there's 9 different plans that the city has, and so you have to actually pluck that number out of all 9 plans if that's what you do. But it's a number that can be very easily derived. What I'm saying is that over the long term, future contributions are also going to depend on what their actual returns are in their investments. I
understand that completely. I completely understand that.
And Homer, this is Lois. I think it's really the idea is really a good one. You got my thumbs up. But I think the analysis really needs to be done by the city.
Oh, yeah.
And so we don't need to have the in-depth understanding. Just a basic understanding, I think, would suffice for understanding their analysis. That would be my thought.
Oh, I completely agree with you on that. My concern is that if you're talking about borrowing money for the wastewater treatment plant and using the money for the cash for something else, there is a percentage of the community that will think somehow Scott's building a house in the south of France.
I can't go there, but he is.
Sooner or later, in my mind, is better that we get this concept out, if it makes financial sense. And then analysis is going to say, yes, this is worth the pain and aggravation that the city council is going to have to go through for this particular thing. I mean, you can imagine the people that will stand up and yell and scream about this.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I'll offer is just, and this is, the staff report that I gave you guys in B2, it contemplated, this a little bit, not in detail like you're talking about, Homer, but it also, being able to pay down rates or supplement the One Water capital improvement plan. So, I feel like if it comes in different pieces, then the CFAC's not kind of germinating around all the potentialities for the use. So I just want to make sure the conversation doesn't get fragmented too much if it's brought in pieces to the group. So again, we're at your pleasure to however you want it to be brought forward if this is something the group wants to discuss. But I just want to make sure it's clear that council's looking for a recommendation around all these potential uses. So however it comes, it needs to come back to council in one piece.
Well, as I said, it doesn't have to be in our next meeting. So if you want to, do it in a meeting in conjunction with another piece. Barbara and John and I were on a committee in 2018, and we spent a couple meetings on the One Water plan. And, one of the suggestions I was going to make is that the city represents the One Water plan to the city council in a study session. Because it was a terrific document, and there's a lot of really important stuff that needs to get done. Right, Bart?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and so absolutely. I mean, the balance between reducing rates and the amount of money to be used for the non-WRF infrastructure projects, that has to be a debate. And there's got to be some trade-offs there. And but since you're going to be working with the state on the amount of this loan, this discussion might influence whatever that monetary request is going to be.
So maybe for the January meeting, we could at least get a grip on how CalPERS works and what the potential savings are with CalPERS. It sounds like that's one of the elements of your inquiry.
Yes, you ready for that? You're going to figure out how CalPERS works in a couple weeks? I think we could do it. I think it's a good goal. I've been a city manager for a while.
You know, if it comes back and the savings is $15,000, then the hell with it. You know, it's dropped, right?
Yeah. I think that we can figure out some pretty basic information, if not more detailed information in that period of time. I mean, the actuarial reports, as the chairperson said, has a lot of that information in it, and it projects out, and it requires you to make assumptions. It also gives you information about what your rates are going to go to if they drop their discount rate, which they've hinted at recently, that we're now their assumed interest rate is 7%, that they're going to realize 7%. That is not actually accurate based on the short term. So they're thinking about dropping it to either 6.5 or 6. And so we can present that kind of information to the committee and make sure that it's clear enough in terms of what side funds we still have, what side funds we don't have. I know we paid off the fireside fund. I think it was in last fiscal year. Yeah. We also take advantage of the upfront payments in July for the full year so that we can take advantage of the savings that were identified. So we can bring back for sure something.
Okay.
That would help.
I think that'd be worthwhile.
I'm wondering, and I was criticized at one of the last couple of meetings about asking too many questions, and that was relative to things that were on the agenda. We are now basically assigning work to the city from CFAC. Is that what we're supposed to be doing? Now, they can hear what we're suggesting and prioritize whether or not that's worth spending time on that versus something else. But I don't know that we can suggest things as Homer's done, but do we assign work to bring back? Is that?
Yeah. That's a good point, Bart. No, I think the question the reason why I'm sort of dialoguing with you all is that seems to be part of the item that, you know, your council has asked you to wrestle with, which is the, you know, items 2 and 3 on B2, you know, it's the whole mixture of loans and cash and what we can use anything that rolls out of that for. So this is something that council wants us to do and wants your input on. So I guess the question to the committee is, what's the best way to package this? Do you want us to sort of bring us in pieces, or do you want us to bring it all at once? Because we need your input. So whatever you think is going to be most effective for your review will be helpful for us to know. So if it's giving you a piece of CalPERS because you're sort of indicating that's an interest related to that WARF item, then it really does fall within your work plan.
Okay, so put that one last on the agenda, though, if we get to it. I think it would be good for the CFAC members to have a general understanding of how CalPERS works, though. I mean, you don't have to read through one of those actuarial reports from cover to cover to get a rudimentary understanding. It would be helpful for all of us to have that. So that discussion, I think, would be beneficial. Thank you, Homer.
Okay.
Okay, so the next meeting is.
I'm sorry, the other thing that I have on my whiteboard, which I just looked at just to double check, is to bring the AB 1600 report to CFAC before it goes to council.
Do we typically do that?
The AB 1600, which is the development impact fee report.
I don't know if we bring that to CFAC.
If we don't, then that
doesn't come to CFAC.
there looks like blank faces, so that's awesome.
It's not.
Yeah.
Going to erase it. Right?
John, this is Lois. I wondered if we want to wait until council assigns us Measure M oversight, or do we at some point want to put that on our agenda?
Yeah, we'll throw down Measure E probably. Forget your schedule. What's your schedule now? What do we agree?
Well, I thought Measure E doesn't start till April, so we'll have all this done by April. All this other stuff.
All this other stuff's gonna be done by April. Okay.
Yeah.
I like your optimism. Yeah, good point, Lois. So I don't know when exactly where that'll be placed. It's really going to be more focused on next fiscal year, but certainly want to have that probably as we develop the budget and figure out what those uses will be for, and get your take on how to do the oversight, much like you do for Measure Q.
Scott, could we do that before the budget gets too far along?
That would be the goal. But I've got to look up the schedule to make sure we don't overload one meeting over others. So hold 1 second.
Yeah, let me try to find it, because I tried to overlay it, Scott, over the schedule that you presented.
Yeah, it would either be February or April that we'd bring the discussion about Measure E.
Yeah, it would seem like that would be the time to get the input on the budget process and the budget calendar and the priorities for Measure Q and Measure E. Right. I know that we have to bring back an A and a B list on Measure Q, and so then the question is, are we doing the same process for Measure E? And you and I haven't talked about that, and haven't heard any feedback from the council on that. So,
well, we can talk about that next month when we talk about the budget calendar, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so our next meeting is January 19th. I didn't double check that, but is that right? Okay, January 19th, 3 p.m.
Yep.
And are there any last minute items, comments? Okay, then I'm showing 4:56. We are adjourned.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Happy holidays.
See you in the
Bye.
You too.